When an ancient alien empire, the Zyros Dominion, made a grave mistake by sparing humanity's peaceful colonies, they thought they had secured victory. But the Zyros did not anticipate the quiet resilience of a species so willing to forgive, and so capable of striking back when pushed too far. Now humanity has one last hope, a single peaceful woman, the unlikeliest hero of them all, who will use nothing but intelligence and diplomacy to ensure the Zyros' reign of terror ends. The galaxy will soon learn that sometimes, the greatest weapon is a heart determined to heal. The stars had long whispered of the Zyros Dominion, a ruthless empire that had swept across the galaxy, conquering civilizations in its wake. Known for their towering fleets, their brutal war tactics, and their unwavering ambition, the Zyros were feared by all. To them, the human colonies in the Helix Arm were nothing but insignificant blips, insubstantial in comparison to the vast empires they had already consumed. The Zyros had heard the stories, of course, rumors of humanity's potential, of their rapid rise, of the quiet resilience of their peaceful worlds. But none of it mattered to the warlords who commanded the Zyros' fleets. They had made their mark across the stars and saw no reason to fear this new species. They had been wrong. It started on a small, tranquil world known as New Caldera. It wasn't a rich planet, nor a strategic one. It had no major military presence, no fortified defenses. Just lush farms, simple villages, and peaceful families. It was the perfect target for the Zyros to send a message, a reminder to the galaxy of their power and dominance. And so, the Zyros came. The people of Lorenth Vale, a village that dotted the rolling hills of New Caldera, didn't even see the threat until it was too late. They didn't have the technology to detect the Zyros' warships descending from orbit. They didn't know the darkness was coming for them. And when the Zyros descended, they brought devastation. The Zyros' warlords, led by Lord Varnock, a ruthless, bloodthirsty general, ordered the destruction of the village. Homes were burned to the ground, and innocent lives were torn apart. The Zyros didn't want territory, they wanted terror. And they got it. They slaughtered every man, woman, and child they could find in Lorenth Vale, leaving behind a graveyard of ash and silence. But there was one life they didn't take. A young girl named Karina, no older than 7, was the only survivor of the massacre. She was the daughter of a humble farmer, a child too innocent to understand the weight of the universe. She didn't know the Zyros, nor the terror they caused. She only knew that her world had shattered in an instant. Her body was found broken and bruised, but her spirit was unbroken. She was the only living witness to the Zyros' cruelty, and she was the only one who could bring their empire to its knees. News of the attack spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Zyros had not just killed innocents, they had provoked the one force they should have feared, humanity. But instead of vengeance being sought by fleets or armies, it was a singular force, a shadow that would come for them in the darkest hour. The Zyros had made one mistake, one that would change the course of galactic history forever. Karina's father, Darian Renner, was no ordinary man. He was a name whispered in fear across the galaxy, a myth, a ghost, a weapon unlike any other. Darian was a legend, but the galaxy had not seen him in decades. Darian Renner was humanity's final contingency plan. A man forged in darkness, enhanced by the very technology that had once been outlawed. He was the Hitman, a genetically perfected soldier, surgically enhanced and mentally calibrated to be a weapon of destruction. His past was a void, known only to a few, a file too black to be viewed by anyone outside the highest echelons of Earth's command. And when Darian received the footage of his daughter's death, the world saw what happens when a man like him is pushed too far. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't consult with generals or politicians. He didn't care for the formalities of diplomacy or interstellar peace. Darian Renner was not a man of laws or orders, he was a man of vengeance. Within hours, Darian was on his way to the Zyros Empire. The first place to feel his wrath was Drax 7, a remote outpost on the fringes of Zyros space. It wasn't important to the Zyros, merely a strategic waypoint. But to Darian, it was the beginning. He arrived silently, as shadows do. He didn't need a fleet. He didn't need bombs. He only needed a few minutes. And when the recon drones arrived, they found nothing but an eerie, unnerving silence. There were no explosions. No alarms. Just the sight of armor suits, neatly piled up with no one inside. The Zyros had no idea what had hit them. The Galactic Council was puzzled. Earth had sent coordinates. No ships, no army, no formal military might. Just coordinates. But behind those coordinates followed something much more deadly. Darian didn't need a massive fleet to make a statement. He was the weapon. He was humanity's answer to a galaxy that had underestimated them. The Zyros began to panic. Their warlords, once feared across the stars, found themselves retreating, not from Earth's armies, but from the cold, relentless shadow that was Darien Renner. They had mistaken humanity's restraint for weakness. Now they would learn the truth. By the time Darien made his way to Greyleth Prime, the heart of the Zyros Dominion, it was too late. Their warlords were already fleeing, abandoning their people, their empires, and their territories. They feared the one thing they couldn't understand: a man who worked alone, who needed nothing but his rage to burn entire worlds to the ground. The Zyros warlords had no illusions left. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were witnessing the terrible price for that mistake. The galaxy, once a stage for their brutal reign, was now crumbling beneath the weight of Darien Renner's wrath. The once mighty Zyros Empire, which had stretched across vast swaths of space, began to fracture and fall apart, piece by piece, world by world. The last remaining Zyros warlord, Vrock the Spine Eater, had escaped to the outermost reaches of known space, beyond mapped dimensions, hoping to evade Darien's wrath with a secret technology, a phase-shifting drive that could jump between alternate dimensions, leaving the relentless manhunt behind. He believed that no one could follow him through the fractures in space. He was wrong. The moment Vrock's ship slipped into the void, Darien was already there, waiting in the shadows. Vrock's crew never saw it coming. They never knew that Darien Renner had slipped on board before they even activated the phase drive. And so, for 4 long weeks, they lived in a constant state of dread, knowing that the hunter was always there. The ship jumped between dimensions, leaping across the fabric of reality itself, but each jump ended with more bodies, more silence. By the time they reached the final dimension, the crew was already dead, each one systematically slaughtered by the lone hunter. Vrock, trapped on his own ship, could only watch as his empire crumbled. His eyes were filled with terror, not of Darien himself, but of the knowledge that there was no escape. When Vrock finally stood before his final adversary, it was not in the great halls of his fortress, surrounded by soldiers, or on the battlefield among his legions. It was alone, on the cold metal floor of his ship. Darien stood across from him, eyes cold, his face the embodiment of grief and wrath. Vrock had seen death in many forms, but never like this. He had thought himself untouchable, an apex predator in a galaxy of lesser beings. Now, he was just another name on a list. "No more running," Darien said, his voice low and grim. "You started this. Now it ends." In a single swift motion, Darien closed the distance. Vrock's fate was sealed in the blink of an eye. The last of the Zyros warlords, the architect of countless deaths, fell with nothing more than a whisper in the darkness. The battle for Greyleth Prime, the last stronghold of the Zyros Dominion, was the final stand. With their warlord gone, the remaining Zyros forces scattered, abandoning their ships and weapons as they fled into the deep reaches of space. The once proud fleet was reduced to nothing more than a fleeing mob, too terrified to resist, too broken to fight. The Zyros had no will to carry on. Their empire, once a symbol of terror, was no more. When the dust settled, the galaxy could only look upon the devastation and wonder at the sheer magnitude of what had been achieved. One man, humanity's last weapon, had torn through the might of an empire in just 4 weeks. Darien Renner had brought down a civilization with nothing but his fury, his training, and the burning desire to avenge his daughter. But that was not the end. The stars themselves had learned a crucial lesson: never underestimate humanity. Darien's vengeance was not just a message to the Zyros, it was a warning to the galaxy. When Earth sends its warriors, it does not send armies. It sends a man who will never stop until his goal is complete. On Earth, a small memorial was held for Ka-Rina. There was no grand ceremony. There were no speeches or state-sponsored tributes. Just a small grave in the fields of New Caldera, marked with her name. Darien stood before it, a single flower in hand. He had done what was necessary. He had avenged his daughter. As he stood alone in the twilight, the sound of a distant council envoy's voice reached him, offering words of peace, of reconciliation. Darien turned away without saying a word. The message had already been sent. The stars were listening. He didn't need to speak. His actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. "Don't make humanity angry," the message echoed across the galaxy. "Don't give them a reason, because sometimes Earth doesn't send an army. It just sends Darien, and he never comes back empty-handed." And with that, the legend of Darien Renner, the last of humanity's weapons, was cemented in the annals of history. The Zyros were no more, their empire in ashes, their warlords forgotten. The galaxy would never forget the man who destroyed them. But Darien Renner, the ghost, the hitman, would fade into the shadows once more, his vengeance complete, his daughter avenged. The stars would remember. And humanity would stand proud, knowing that when the time came, they would never be weak, never be helpless. They had one weapon. And it was enough. Liked the story? Hit subscribe and stay tuned, because humanity's journey has only just begun.